Welcome to Grow Good, a place to spread joy, beauty, and goodness, to bear good fruit, a place where others can meet or be inspired to meet God. So get cozy, lean in, and listen close. Miracles are at work, and He wants to meet you too. Hi all, and happy Tuesday. I hope you are off to a great week so far. We are all moved into our new place. Please continue to pray for us in this new chapter of our lives. It's awesome so far, so thank you for all your prayers already. And I'm so excited to bring you the story of Sonja Corbitt, the Bible study evangelista. Maybe you've heard of her. She's done some incredible work already in the church with her ministry. But it was such an honor and a joy and a privilege to get to hear her story of how she converted to Catholicism, how she first met the Lord at age 8 through this really personal encounter that changed everything in her life. And then how the Lord slowly but surely led her into the fullness of truth in the Catholic faith. It is such a beautiful story. I cannot wait to share it with you. I hope that it helps you and maybe you can relate. If someone you know is in this process or has questions about the church, it would be an awesome episode to share with them. I think Sonja is just so relatable, so funny, and the way she explains it all is just... it's so eye-opening and it really moved me. So I think it will move others too. I hope and I pray it will. Her relationship with the Lord is it's so palpable and tangible, and it's just so inspiring. So without any other delay, here is Sonja. Sonja, hello. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Rachel. Thank you for having me.
I'm so excited that you are here. I cannot wait to hear your story. But can you just start us out by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit about you and what you do right now?
All right. I'm Sonja Corbitt. I call myself the Bible study evangelista, and I made up a word there. People always ask me, what's an evangelista? So an evangelista is simply an evangelist, like in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, only I'm not a dude. So I added an A on the end. And an evangelist just offers the faith from their own point of view. And that's what I do. That's what I do with Bible studies in every possible media and every outlet that I am offered the opportunity to do so. And so that's what I do, Bible study all the time.
Love it. Love it so much. All right. So I guess let's go back to the beginning. And could you share just a little bit about maybe how you grew up, what your journey was like in the faith, and if you can remember having a first moment where you felt like you really encountered God at a more personal level?
So when I was very young, all the way up through really my early 20s, I had a very difficult relationship with my father. And so my first understanding of God was very skewed by that relationship. And so I was always afraid of God. I was afraid of my dad. And my mother always kept me in Bible study or Bible books, like picture books and then story books. My whole childhood, I can remember always having those. And because I was on restriction is what my dad called it. But because I was on restriction all the time, I read all the time. That's all I did. That's all I was really allowed to do. I couldn't leave my room. He took all the toys out of my room so that there was nothing in the room but the bed and my dresser with my clothes in it. So the one thing I could do was schoolwork and read. And my mom would take me to the library, and I would get as many books as they would let me have at one time. And I would bring them home and I would read until I had read them all. And then I would pick up the books that I had that she had given me. And so typically that ended up being those Bible books. And I would read the stories, and I knew all the stories. And we didn't really go to church all that often. We went regularly. We probably missed one or two Sundays out of each month. But my dad very rarely went. He was a highway patrolman, and so he worked swing shifts all the time. So he would work 2 weeks on first, 2 weeks on second, and then a week on third. And so we were constantly tiptoeing around the house around his sleep schedule. And so he didn't go very much. And there came a time when we actually didn't go all that much either. But I remember going. And I remember Mom always took us to Vacation Bible School. And because we were in church quite a bit, I knew and had in my heart, I had scripture in my heart and didn't even know I did. I remember writing poetry, and I looked back at it later, and I was like, that's straight from Isaiah, Sonja. Something like the shepherd who finds the lost sheep or something like that. And I just thought it was so funny because I didn't even know that it was in me like that, but it was. And it was, kind of cute. But my first real experience of God was in a summer revival, which is what we called it as non-Catholics. I was raised a Southern Baptist, and we had a summer revival, and it was in an outdoor arbor, which is basically like a one-sided building. So all of the other three sides were open, and it was an outdoor kind of arena. And we had our pastor. A revival is a lot like a mission. And so it was 3 or 4 days in a row. Usually it was a whole week at night of services. And so we were there, and I remember we were singing the invitation song, which is the last song before everything breaks up. And the line in the song that got me was, "Come sinner, come home." And I was 8. Wow. And my heart started beating out of my chest. And I just knew I had a hold of the back of the pew in front of me, and my heart was beating so hard and so fast, and I knew I was a sinner. And really, that's the only thing I ever knew about myself, because my relationship with my dad was always one of punishment and retribution. I was doing something bad or something wrong and getting in trouble and then being punished. And so if I knew anything, it was that I was bad. So that line in the song just overtook me, and I cried so hard, but I didn't know what was happening. I didn't have any idea. I was only 8. That very summer, like within 2 weeks, I went to a summer camp. I begged my mother to let me go. It was a Baptist Sunday or a Baptist camp for the summer. And my mother had worked there when she was a teenager. And I went, and I didn't know anybody. I was the only person there from my area. I didn't know any of the people. And so I was like rooming in these cabins, in the middle of the Blue Ridge Mountains, nowhere. I mean, it was just beautiful and quiet. And there's something in the mountains anyway that really, really draws me. So we had church every day, every night. And so we went to chapel, and I was sitting there, and we sang the invitation, and my heart started beating kind of fast, not like the weeks before, but the pastor who was teaching that night, he said, if you are sitting there and your heart is beating really fast and you're not sure what to do, you need to come up here and ask Jesus into your heart. And I remembered that happening to me, and then it happened all over again. I was like, oh my gosh. He said, you need to come up here and ask Jesus into your heart, and he will cleanse you from all your sins. So I ran down that aisle, and I cried so hard, my eyes were almost completely swollen shut. Wow. And I got up, and I was going to go downstairs to wipe my face because the snot was everywhere. I mean, I felt so clean. For the first time in my entire life, I felt clean. I felt good. And I was going to go downstairs in the basement of this little chapel to wash my face. And when I pulled the door shut behind me, the stairs were very steep and it was very dark. There was a light at the bottom of the stairs, but up at the top, when I shut the door, it was very dark. But I saw Jesus's face beside me. I saw him when I shut the door. I saw it was almost like a light. But the light of his face, I could see that it was him. I knew it was him. Wow. And it didn't surprise me. Looking back on that, I'm like, I wonder why I never questioned that. I'm not sure I even told anybody about it, but I remembered it. And I went downstairs and I wiped my face, and then I begged them to let me call my parents and tell them that I had gotten saved, because I was so excited and I was just so overwhelmed by the feeling of it. And they let me call home, and I remember nobody was excited. And I thought, oh, okay. And so I kind of put that on the shelf, and then I hit my teens, and I did that whole dance between, am I going to be bad or am I going to be good? And I was very, very bad all the way up into my college years. I had one foot in and one foot out. I did all the stuff that people do. But there was always something in me that knew the right thing. Even when I was choosing the wrong thing, I knew what was right. And I always felt like God was mad at me, or that he was going to get even with me because I was not doing the right things. I was having fun. And then I don't even know what happened, except I continued to sort of go to church. My parents got divorced when I was 13, and that was devastating. It was like a bomb went off in our family, but it was actually very good looking back, because I think that had my dad stayed in our family any longer, I would have really and truly, not exaggerating, I would have been crazy. I would have lost myself entirely. And so, although it was very devastating, it was actually a good thing that he was gone. And at that time, as I got old enough to drive myself, I would occasionally go to church, because I felt like if I didn't, at least if I was going to church, I could still do the bad things, and I had kind of one foot still in. So I was mitigating the danger, or I thought I was. And so I would go, and my mother just quit going altogether. I think she got her feelings hurt somewhere along the line, and she quit going. But I would go even as a teenager. And then my husband, when we married, we started going to this little country church in the middle of nowhere. And we started going, and we moved and found a family church that was very similar to the one that we had been going to, very small, probably 100, maybe 100 families altogether. And I had a mentor there, and we decided we were going to teach a Bible study together on the book of Acts. Of all things, I don't know how in the world we chose that, but she wanted me to help her co-teach. And I said, okay, fine. I'm like 20, maybe 22, 23, really, really young. I didn't know a thing. I had no idea what I was doing. And I really didn't even want to do it, but I loved her, and she was so helpful to me in my growth as a Christian. And so we started teaching it. And about 3 weeks into that study, she looked at me and she said, Sonja, I really think you're supposed to teach this yourself. And it struck me, because I had sort of felt the same way, but I felt silly. It felt very silly for me to have that thought. I didn't know anything. I mean, who was I? And she said, I really think you're supposed to. And I said, well, I kind of do too, but I don't know what to do. And she said, you just need to do what you're doing. And I was like, okay. And what I was doing is I was reading the lessons, and I was getting all this stuff from the Bible, and I was learning about God, and everything I learned just lit me up. And I could not keep myself from like throwing up on everybody, everything that I was learning. And it was so exciting. And that's really all I was doing. And so when she kind of turned it over to me, and what was so good about it for me was that I had the whole hour. I had the whole hour to tell all this stuff that I had found. Wow. And I was so excited about it. And that was the first time that I got an inkling that I think I'm supposed to do this. I think this is something that maybe... And of course, I didn't know it was a spiritual gift. I didn't know any of that then. All I knew is I loved it. People loved it when I did it. And something in me exploded on the inside. It grew. It got bigger. I grew in my love for God. I could feel his love for me. I was changing. Things were changing. And I just couldn't stop. I couldn't stop. And so I went from that study to another study, and then another, and then I started teaching Sunday school. And my pastor gave me his co-ed Sunday school class because he didn't have time to do it anymore. And he gave it to me. And that was just not something that you did in our denomination at that time. And so it kind of caused a little bit of twittering in the church. But I grew that class to the point where it was the only adult class in the whole church because everybody had kind of come to that class. And that was also not a good thing, actually, for some people. And we actually experienced 2 church splits in that church. The first one was with a pastor that I didn't know very well, and I was really, really young. Those were in the early years, and I didn't know what was going on, and I really didn't care. I didn't know them. And I just figured the people who were making the decisions probably knew better than we did, and so it didn't affect me much. But the pastor who gave me his Sunday school class, 5 years later, when the very same thing happened with the very same people against a brand new pastor, and I did love this pastor. When I saw that happened, it happened twice, and I saw it happen, and I knew what the Bible said about God's pastors and his people, and I knew that he had made better provision for both, and it bothered me a lot. And that's when I really began to think something is very wrong at the foundation of the way this is set up. And that's when I really started searching for something else. I mean, I never in a million years would I have ever entertained the Catholic Church at that time. I had no idea what I was looking for. I just knew that something was very, very wrong.
That was going to be my question, is just like,
what was,
well, I was going to be, what were your thoughts about the Catholic Church at that time? Were you totally opposed to it? Had you been introduced to it at all at any level?
Never. I had never met a priest in the flesh until I walked into the Catholic Church for the first time. At that time, what I was thinking is there has to be something better than this. There's something so wrong with this. And the reason I knew is because of my own father wound. I had spent a whole decade working with God on the woundedness that I was acting out of. I had terrible self-medicating habits. I had a serious rage problem. I tore up stuff and I ran people off the road in my car and I punched holes in walls. And I was just so out of control at times, but I didn't realize the root of that at all. I just knew that God kept helping. He kept confronting me with my behavior. This is unacceptable. And I was like, well, if everybody would just do what I wanted, it would be fine. It would be perfectly fine if I could just get my way all the time.
Right.
And he kept confronting me in the scriptures. And gently, ever so gently, he started to show me the roots of my behavior. And that root was pain from my father. And so I knew that what those people were doing in that church was evil. It was the evil that split heaven. It was the sin of Satan. And the reason I knew it is because I had been convicted of it over and over and over and over again. I was seeing in them the very same things that I had seen in myself that God had confronted and corrected. And it infuriated me that they could do it and get away with it. It absolutely infuriated me. And it infuriated my husband too. And we left that church and we hid in a mega church, like 4,000 families, enormous church. And we just went there to kind of hide and lick our wounds. And as for the Catholic Church, I was always kind of curious about it, but I knew beyond any shadow of any doubt it was a cult. And after Martin Luther, that they weren't even Christians. Catholics aren't Christians.
Wow.
And that the church is the Pope is the Antichrist. And very, very anti-Catholic is how I grew up. And that's actually when I taught Revelation as a Bible study teacher, I taught that about the church, the Catholic Church. But I always had this little curiosity about it. Not enough to do anything about it, but a little bit of curiosity, just wondering what it was about. But when I began my search, what I wanted to know was Martin Luther's Reformation legitimate? That's what I really wanted to know. And so I began to read Martin Luther's writings in his own words, not in the German, but the translations. And what I saw was a man with a father wound. His father was alcoholic, abusive. His mother was abusive. He grew up in a very fear-oriented, aggressive, controlling household. He fled to the monastery to get away from his family. And I saw myself in him. I call myself now Martin Luther's little sister. I saw that, and I knew because of my background, and now I call these pop quizzes because God took something that I was dealing with, and he showed me how that looks on a public level in a church. He showed it to me twice. And then he showed me what it looks like on a monumental scale in the universal church. And I could see how they were all related and how they were all the very same problem. And so as I read Martin Luther and I saw a man who was not very holy, but who was driven by this same pain, really, and this unrealistic view of God that he got from his own father, when I saw that, I knew that his rebellion was illegitimate. And then I freaked out because then I'm like, okay, well, before that, the church was Catholic. And I could barely get my head around that. I know, Lord, I said, I know you are not asking me to be Catholic. You cannot possibly be asking me to be Catholic. There's just no way. And yet I knew that I could not remain where I was. I didn't know what to do yet, but I couldn't remain where I was. At the same time, I had a friend who was in this co-ed Sunday school class with me. She was about 15 years younger than I. She came into the Catholic Church, and she asked me to come to her Easter Vigil. And I felt so sorry for her. I thought, all right. So I went and I sat through 3 hours of this Easter Vigil, and I thought it was the weirdest thing I had ever seen in my whole life. I was sure we were going to all go to hell. And the only thing that I really appreciated out of that entire Mass, because I had no idea what was going on, was the incense. Because I knew what the Bible said about incense and how it's the prayers of God's people, and they drift up into heaven, and God sees them as a beautiful aroma. And I remember watching the incense. I mean, my whole attention was on the incense for probably an hour of the 3-hour Easter Vigil. And I just kept watching it, and I had just seen on television, I think it was probably St. James Cathedral. And I don't know what service it was. It was probably Easter because it was around that time, but where they had that enormous censer, and it took like 4 or 5 monks to swing that thing through the cathedral. And I was watching it on television. I thought, that's pretty cool, because you could see the smoke just pouring out of it. It was pouring into this cathedral. And so as I'm sitting at this Easter Vigil, I'm watching the smoke kind of go up into the rafters, and it floats up, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, wow, that's very cool. And then the smell hit me. And I was like, oh my gosh, it has a smell. I mean, I just never thought, because I had never been in the presence of incense before like that it had a smell. And the symbolism of that struck me so deeply. I thought that everybody should have incense. After that, everybody needed incense. And so I ran straight to our local Catholic bookstore in the dark, like Nicodemus. I went to the Catholic bookstore in the dark and I bought a can of incense, and I brought it home. And that was the first Catholic purchase I ever made. And I started using it in my Bible studies at this Baptist church.
No.
I swear. And it was so funny because the pastor...
People were probably like, this is great. I love these incense.
I loved it. I thought it was really cool. But the pastor and the people at the church, they were like, wait a minute.
Yes, it's a little too Catholic for me.
It was funny. But I had my feet were sort of my feet were a little bit wet at that point in the Catholic Church. And so there was actually a movement at that time called the Emerging Church in the Protestant churches. And it was pulling a whole lot of the practices, the liturgical practices and the prayer practices, the meditations, lots and lots of stuff. It was pulling from the ancient practices of the Catholic faith without the teachings. And so I was I was drifting along in that movement for a while. So I was doing a whole lot of Catholic stuff, but I wasn't about to be Catholic, you
Right.
know. But then all of those things sort of converged at the same time. And I started to question Catholicism. And as I began to question, I went to my favorite bookstore. It was called the Book Attic, and it's a used bookstore. And I was just browsing, and I happened to see, if you believe in
coincidences,
I saw a catechism. And I thought, that's interesting. So I picked it up and I read the first page. And I thought to myself, this is what I have been looking for. It was so deep. And it taught things that I knew from my own Bible study. I was reading it, and it was Catholic, and I knew it from my own Bible study, and I had been teaching it. But it was not taught in anywhere else that I had been exposed to. I felt like it was new to me. I'm sure it wasn't, but it felt new to me because I had never heard it. I was teaching it, and people were like, where did she get this? You know, I'm like, I got it from the Bible. And then I'm reading it in this catechism, and I'm thinking, how can they know this? You know? And as I read it, then I thought, okay, well, let's look at the Eucharist, you know, because I was flipping through and I thought, I wonder what that is. Never even heard the word. Didn't know what the Eucharist was. And I thought, okay, I wonder what this is. And so I started reading in the catechism, but it was still very, very Catholic, you know, and I was like, nah, I need some Bible, you know. It's full of Bible, yes, but I needed like an apologetics kind of thing. So I started searching online for some apologetic stuff, and I found some really, really good apologetics material. And when I was reading the scriptures then through that lens, especially John 6, and I was able to tie it back to all the Old Testament stuff that I knew so well, the tabernacle, the presence bread, the manna, Melchizedek, Ezekiel's scroll, his vision of the new the church under the Messiah, all of those things combined, and I could see the consistency between the Old Testament foreshadowing and this Eucharist that I had never heard of. And right there in the book of John, I'm reading it and I'm looking at the Greek parts of the Greek there, and I'm like, this cannot mean anything else. It has to mean this. It can't mean it, unless you're going to do backflips and pretzel twists in trying to interpret it to be something that it doesn't say. It has to say this, and he has to mean this. And once I assented to that teaching, I thought, if we've gotten this wrong, and this is so important to our salvation, what else have we missed? And then I got scared. And then because I realized we are way off base. And at that point, that was the first domino to fall. The Eucharist fell first, and the rest of them just boom, 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 boom. It was just, I read my way in about a year. It was the most earth-shattering thing that had ever happened to me.
Oh my gosh. I can only imagine. That must have just been wild, because there's so much that I feel like you were already in it to a certain extent, but you were almost like, it's like being in like the shallow end or something. But like, then all of a sudden you were just like thrown into the deep end, and you're like, oh my gosh, like there's so much.
That's exactly what I said. Yeah. I said that in prayer. I said, I feel like I have stepped off a cliff into the ocean.
Yeah. That is so crazy. It's so wild how he works through these things and how he shows us in our own time, but then it takes us also to respond to it. You know, like I love how you said that that's when you started seeking. And that's the thing is, like, now I feel like I keep trying to encourage people to ask the questions, like, go find the answers, like literally try to prove it wrong. That's exactly
what I was doing. I was determined I was going to prove it wrong.
Right. Like that's like God's dream. He's like, yes, please keep trying, because I'm trying to show you these answers. And I just want you to realize it, you know, on your own time when you're ready. And you have to be the one in the driver's seat in a way, even though obviously God's always there giving you exactly what you need before you even ask for it because he knows what you need next. And I just love
that's
everything
what was so
about your
amazing to
story.
me too. When I was looking at all the details that he had to line up so that I could step into those situations and then receive what it was he was waiting to give me. I mean, I was like, whoa. I don't know how you do that, Lord, but that is so brilliant.
Like it's literally mind blowing because it makes you realize how powerful and big he is. Because
what I was so struck by is I know I chose that, and yet there's somehow I kind of didn't.
Right.
You know, I chose it, but he already chose it for me.
Right. Like
That's
he was waiting
so crazy about it.
you, for you to just take that next step. Like he's just constantly wanting us to go deeper and deeper. I found it doesn't really stop. At least it hasn't for me.
No, it doesn't.
Like it's just like the next thing and the next thing. Like it just there's always deeper you can go. And you might plateau for a bit and hang out at one place, but then like he's just waiting for you to come even deeper, open yourself up even further so that he can like show you even more of his love and his truth and his goodness. Yeah.
When I was going through that whole portion of that, I guess 10 years where we were really, really working on this father wound, it was so difficult. I mean, it was so difficult because I had to confront particular memories and remember those and feel the truth of them and the pain of them and how I was acting out of that. And it was so hard and it was exhausting. I mean, it was like therapy on steroids. It was just this constant, and I would just get through one sort of episode, I call that a pop quiz. I would get through it and I would learn from it. And then I would go, all right, Lord, now what? And boom, there'd be another one.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, and then I could see though, the pattern in it. I could see what he was doing. And that's how I came to realize what he was doing. I saw the pattern. The same kinds of people were coming into my life over and over. And I was having the same reactions to the same kinds of people. And he was showing me through those patterns, this is your trigger. Men in authority over you who try to control you or manipulate you or criticize you. And I was like, dang.
Like the light bulb.
Yes. I was like, oh, it's that simple. And suddenly then it would happen. And I was like, that's just my daddy thing. I'm fine. I don't have to, I can chill here. I don't have to go off the deep end.
Right.
And then I started to get some control of myself and get some victory in these little things. And I was like, wow.
And it's so freeing. Like, it's
freeing.
True freedom because you have that self-control and that, the ability to realize what it is and not just react based on your
I couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
I would never have believed that could have ever been possible for me. I was so in pain, but I can remember after learning something like that, I was so excited. And I had just gotten over something, and I'm like breathing hard still. And then I'd look at the Lord in prayer and go, okay, now what? What are we doing next? And I was just ready for the next thing as fast as we could go. And I was almost like, Lord, if you'll teach fast, I'll learn fast. Let's go. And he sort of just like unbridled me and let me run.
Yeah.
It was the most freeing, beautiful thing ever.
Wow.
He loves that about us. He loves our personalities.
That's what he wants to do. I just keep having this image of like all of heaven just like laughing like with you.
Sure.
I think you keep them laughing. That is what I'm getting.
Sure, I do.
Yeah. Oh, I love it so much. But so then, so how in the world? So you did this searching, a lot of knowledge intake. And so how did it get from your head to your heart? And then how did you ultimately come into the church?
Well, the Eucharist really did the whole head and heart thing for me all in one fell swoop, because as a Protestant, I was praying two very strange prayers. The first one was, Lord, it'd be really cool if we had one leader. We just say, we got all these denominations, and if we just had one leader, it would be so much easier for us all to understand what we needed to be doing, and I'm praying for a pope and I'm a Protestant, And the second prayer that I was praying, as deep in my guts as it could get. This is where this prayer came from. I was praying, Lord, there has to be a way that we can be closer. There has to be. There's got to be. Is there not some way? And I remember bawling in the dark on my porch one night, just praying, just begging God, there's got to be a way that we can be closer. And when I saw what the Eucharist was and all that the church taught about it, and I received my first Eucharist on my Easter Vigil that I came into full communion, it was a super marital moment. It was exactly what I had prayed for. And I could not believe that he had taken that prayer that was so deep and so wide. And I was literally thinking physical. Not like creepy, weird or anything like that, but I was really thinking something with skin on it. There's got to be a way we can be closer. And when I received the Eucharist for the first time, that is exactly what I was thinking. He answered that prayer in the deepest part of who I was with his church and the Eucharist.
Wow.
I could not believe it. Yeah. It was, and I still cannot believe it. It's still beautiful to me.
I love that so much, those two questions, because he knows us. He created us. And so he knows exactly what we need. And that's what he built the church to be.
Amen.
It's just so beautiful to think about. He knew that we would need that and would want that and desire that. And that
what
we'd
a
also
weird prayer. I know. Yes, you're so right.
And we need a leader. It's just so, yeah. Oh, so good. So good. I love it so much. But so then how did that lead you to your ministries and doing, I guess it's pretty obvious you were already doing these in the Baptist church, but then did you realize that there was a need in the Catholic church, or what?
I didn't know at all. And a part of what made it so difficult for me to come into the church was that I had what I call a promise. I had a call from God in my early 20s, right around that same time. It was probably 2 or 3 years after I started that Acts study. I felt very clearly that God was calling me to some sort of public activity in my spiritual gifts. And I knew it as I wrote it down. I have it in my journals to this day. I know exactly the date. It was in April, and I know exactly what I said because I went back and read it actually for a book that I was writing, and it was very clear. And yet that's not something I saw in the Catholic Church. Nobody really was doing what I'm doing. There still aren't very many women that I know that do it now, but I had no idea then. And it was very, very hard for me to come into the church because I felt like I was setting that aside. And so on the one hand, if I laid it aside, then I was sinning against this call that I believed I had. But on the other hand, if I didn't come into the church, then I was sinning against the truth of the church. And James says that for him who knows what to do and doesn't do it, it's sin. So I felt like I was between a rock and a hard place. What do I do here? And my husband, there was no way he was going to be Catholic. And I was pregnant at that time with my second child. And it was the hardest that year after I came into the church. For about 3 years, it really was the hardest 3 years of my entire life. It remains, looking back, it was the hardest 3 years of my whole life. There were so many things that were going on that was so difficult, but it was a true and real desert. And God was using that desert to purify me and my motives and my ministry and my teaching, my skills, all of it. He really was doing this very deep work in me. Although I had an inkling of it because I was reading a whole lot of the Carmelite saints, specifically John of the Cross, who's my patron. So I knew that that's kind of what he was doing, and I was okay with that. And I was okay with even the suffering of it because I knew that it was going to work something good. But I didn't see how that was going to work. And when the very year that I came into the church, my pastor immediately made me the religious education director at our parish, which was a huge scandal. And I realized pretty quickly that the church did need what I'm doing. They needed it. I needed it, and the church needed me. And so I just kind of stepped out in faith and was like, well, okay. I mean, I had a lot to learn. I couldn't just start, because I had a lot still to learn about the Catholic Church and the mind of the church in reading the scriptures. I had a lot to learn there, but the foundation was already laid. And so as I began offering studies at my parish, things just kind of started rolling. And it just took off. It just really took off. And then I realized I do have a place here, and that's why I'm here.
He's calling you
I'm
to
here
that.
for this.
Yeah. And it was literally your background that he's using.
It was.
Just now in the Catholic Church, in the fullness of the truth. And what a gift. Yeah, because we desperately need that. And
well, the church has had the scriptures all this time, but
right.
I think what's happened is there was a period in history where people were really discouraged from reading the Bible on their own because the hierarchy or the priests or whatever felt like they would be led astray. It's sort of like the Reformation, if they read it on their own, they'll start a Reformation. And so people were afraid to read it. But now, because of Protestants, we have this hunger has been awakened in us, and we've been challenged. And so because I have both backgrounds, I can teach a Catholic how to resist the superficiality of what Protestants offer, and at the same time, how to evangelize them into the Catholic Church.
Right.
So I know both cultures. I can speak two languages, right. And that's helped me a lot. It's helped me a lot with Protestants, but it's also helped me a lot with Catholics who think they might want to be Protestant. I'm like, whoa, why would you ever leave the church? Why would you leave the Eucharist? Why would you leave all those things and do without what the Protestants don't even know they're missing?
Yeah.
You can have all of that.
Right. It's literally the fullness of it. It's like, you can still keep this, but you also get all of this, which is the actual graces of receiving him. And yes, I know. Oh, that's beautiful though. And so it kind of just rolled from there, and you started eventually your own podcast and your own ministry and all of that. Did that come later, or was that kind of?
I don't even remember when I started that. It wasn't very long. I'd say probably 5 years after I came into the church, I had already begun to sort of do some writing online, and I was teaching, and I was doing some local stuff as far as like guest speaking or whatever. But when I started the podcast, that's when things really started to take off, because I was able to do what I do and choose what I wanted to learn about, because that's really, everybody else is my guinea pig. This is what I want to learn. You want to learn it with me? And so I would do that, and people appreciated it. They appreciated that they didn't have to do all the digging. And a lot of people aren't made for that. They want the scriptures, but they don't have the time. They don't have the resources. They don't have the desire even to do all of that work. Whereas I'm a Bible geek. I could do that all day, every day. Mm-hmm. And so it was a natural fit. And the more I did it, the more helpful it seemed to people. And at some point, that's when, I had this promise that I had. Basically, it boils down to I would be teaching and speaking publicly, but also publishing. And so I had worked to try to get published. And I eventually just let it go. I'm like, it's obvious I got this wrong. Obviously I heard wrong. I'm a false prophet. Take me out and stone me. It is apparent that this is not what I'm supposed to be doing. And so as I started the podcast and things began to really roll, I was contacted by my first editor with my first publisher, just out of the blue. And I almost broke my fingers trying to click on her profile picture, because she contacted me through Facebook. And she said, have you ever thought about writing a book? And I was like, what would you like me to write? Because people ask me that all the time. And she said, well, we published so-and-so's books. And I was like, what? And I am seriously like about to break my finger trying to find out who she is, clicking on the profile picture. And sure enough, that's what it was. And so when I stopped trying to earn the promise that God had given me, when I realized that's what I was doing, and when I stopped it, when I gave it completely to God and I came into the church thinking that it was over, that's when he brought it. And I did nothing to bring that about except follow step by step the little things that he had put in front of me. And I did it wailing and gnashing of teeth. I was fighting the whole way. Yeah. And yet all of it was a stepping stone to what I'm doing.
Wow. It's so true. It's in those little steps. When we try to force it, it's just, it doesn't work. You got to just do it step by step by step. What would you say have been some of your biggest challenges in your relationship with Christ, and what have been some of your greatest joys?
My greatest challenge has always been submitting to his authority and people over me. That has always been the hardest thing for me because people suck. And they do it wrong sometimes, and it's hard to see, it's hard to be blind to God working through someone who is obviously not doing something the way they should be doing it. And when I say that, I'm even including sinful things. And so I had to learn, and this is what I was learning coming into the church. I had to learn how to submit the right way, I guess is what I'm trying to say. What do you do when leaders are sinful? Because we can't follow them in that sin. So what do? Do we rebel and do we fight? That's what we want to do. We want to fight. And that is always my first inclination. I am going to win this battle. I will do whatever it takes to win. And that's a defense mechanism. And I saw that in the churches that I saw split. I saw this need to fight. People wanted to fight, and I knew that was wrong. And so how do I forgive that in myself, forgive that in them, and how do we submit properly? What do we do when people who are in authority over us are sinful? And so what I learned in that time is you stand your ground, you go as high up as you can possibly go, and when you've gotten to the top, you accept that answer as coming from God. And then you leave the rest of it to him. You pray and you wait. And that turned out for me exactly the way it did for Mary when she received the word of God from that angel. And she said yes without Joseph's permission. And she waited. She endured the consequences of that yes. And she waited for God to vindicate her. And look at her.
Wow.
And that's what I learned. If you are in a situation like that, you must resist the sin that you see. You cannot be complicit in it, and you can't allow people to sin without challenging that. But when you do, you have to accept the consequences, whatever those are, and know that God will work through those, whatever they are, and that at some point you will be vindicated. Mary Magdalene is another great example of that. When she poured out that oil on his feet, and they were all just so scandalized by that. And he said, wait a minute, everybody will remember her. And now everybody does. And so that was the hardest thing for me, is learning how to submit to authority and trust God in it, and how to resist properly in a holy way. That was the biggest challenge. My biggest, all of it. There's not one thing. Because there are so many gifts and so many gifts in my life. He's the greatest gift. Him comes everything, right?
Yeah. Yes, that really does sum it up. Everything that you've been talking about your whole life, right? It completely changed from the inside out.
He
uh,
gave me everything I really wanted and didn't know how to say I wanted. I wanted to be a wife. I wanted to be a mother, but I wanted a real marriage. I didn't want it to look like a happy marriage. I wanted it to be a happy marriage. I wanted happy children. I didn't want to just have kids. I wanted to be a good mom, and I wanted them to be happy and healthy and spiritual and all of that. And he led me in those things. Everything that I desired with all my heart, he gave me as and he was able to, because I was willing to follow him, or actually I guess he dragged me by the hair sometimes, but I was willing to let him do that, you know.
yeah, so beautiful. Oh my gosh, amen. And what have been some of your standout influences along your journey? That
Oh,
if there's any that you want to mention, whether it's a book or another podcast or a speaker or even a specific sacrament. I know we talked a lot about the Eucharist, but anything that you want to mention?
I have to say the Carmelites really were. I call the Teresas my flock of Teresas, because I feel like they sort of shepherded me and still do in so many ways. So John of the Cross for sure, and the scriptures, obviously, the Carmelites. And then as far as the sacraments, in the beginning, it was confession, because that was really the only sacrament I was able to receive until I received the Eucharist. And so I went every single week. Every single time the doors were open, I went to confession because I was able to receive that grace. And I realized after I came into the church that I was actually using that as a crutch when I needed to be using the Eucharist in that way.
Right.
So I kind of diverted. And now I believe probably the Eucharist, but in adoration especially. Adoration is very, very important to me. Daily Mass and adoration, probably right now.
Yeah, beautiful. And the last question that I hope to ask everyone who comes on at the end is, can you share with us one scripture verse that is either speaking to you recently or that played a foundational role in your journey, and why?
I would have to say it's from the Song of Solomon, and it says, I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine.
Hmm.
It's, I know that he has me, that he holds me, that he's present, that he's protecting me. I know that I am his. I know that he loves me more deeply than I could ever fathom. And I want to love him that way. I want to offer that back with the little smallness of me. You know, whatever I have, I want him to have. I want him. He's mine and I am his. You know, I don't know. Everything kind of falls under that.
Yeah, it's like sums it all up. Yeah, that's so beautiful. Oh my gosh, Sonja,
I'm sorry I bawled.
No, it's making me cry too. Your relationship with him is just, oh, it's so palpable. And your whole story is just so inspiring. And I just think it's so clear how you've you've let him crash down all those walls. And in doing that, it's led you on your mission. It's led you literally on your call for like your whole life. He's able to answer all these desires, like you're saying, because you've let him in and you've let him lead you. And even though sometimes you're kicking and screaming, you're still doing it and you're still showing up and you're still have faith, that faith, unwavering.
That's all I try to tell people, you know. That's all I want people to know is it's not going to always be happy, but it doesn't matter if you're not flying. You will fly, but sometimes you're just crawling.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes you're crawling on your face, just trying to take one more step, but that's still movement. You know, it's still moving forward. And even when we feel like we're stagnant, maybe in one area because we're struggling with something and maybe we're not ready to let it go, we can still be moving ahead in another area. And because we are body, soul, mind, and spirit, we're a whole person, that means that we're still moving. And so it's okay. It's okay to be patient and to be gentle with ourselves and let God love us that way. Because when we let him reveal himself to us, we grow in that love and we become more of that love, and we're able to share that. And that's what he wants. He wants that communion with himself so that we can have that communion then with other people, and we can draw other people in.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Oh
I'm
my
ready to hear
gosh.
your story.
Oh gosh. Thank you so much, Sonja. This has been amazing. Incredibly. I feel like also it's so weird because multiple things you said have been on my mind this week. And Mary Magdalene, the oils, that was a reading this week. And it really just clung to my heart. Adoration and just a lot of what you said. It's clearly, I think, the Spirit was speaking through you, and it moved my heart. So thank you.
That's my prayer.
Thank
every
you
day
so much for your time and for opening up and being so vulnerable and sharing your story with us.
My thrill
right.
completely.
Bye, Sonja.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much for growing some good with us today. Visit us at togrowgood.com/podcast to find links to everything we mentioned in today's conversation. If you enjoyed today's conversation, would you please consider leaving us a review on iTunes or on whatever app you're listening from? Reviews help podcasts to show up higher in search results so that more people can find these incredible stories of the Lord at work. If you enjoy this podcast, please consider sharing it with a friend, a family member, or a coworker who might enjoy the conversation as well. Find us on Instagram at @togrowgood. See you next week.